Hey everyone, it's Michael, GoosebumpsFan. I hope you're doing well today. I'm going to be reviewing the last, at this current moment, of the Goosebumps comic series. Of course, the newest IDW one came out. It's called Secrets of Fever Swamp. I've not read that yet, but this is a precursor to IDW getting the Goosebumps comic book rights. This is actually back when Scholastic was still doing trade paperbacks, basically. Typically called Goosebumps Graphix. This one here kind of counts as Volume 4, and it kind of doesn't at the same time. It's almost a soft reboot in some ways. I've recorded this review 3 times now, and I'm going to try to do it in a way this time that's underneath a half an hour without getting into too much detail about stuff. I feel like I went too long with a lot of those. I didn't want to post them out there. This is a mostly positive review. If I come across kind of pissy or anything, it's because I had a weird day already. I slept in past church, so I'm kind of bummed about that. I love my church. I love my family there. Great blessing in my life. But on top of that, this book really rubbed me the wrong way when I read it last night, so we're going to get into this just slightly. I feel like I haven't said things the right way when I've reviewed it, so I wanted to do it again for a review. Anyway, Goosebumps Graphix, Slappy's Tales of Horror. Now this is very interesting. This is a very different take on what we've talked about before with the other Goosebumps Graphix books. I've reviewed and posted reviews for all of those and rated them and whatnot. I plan on kind of ranking all 4 of these books here soon, whenever I get a chance. I still have the other 2 at my old house. I don't have those here where I can go ahead and do the video today. So at some point I'll try to get that done. But I don't know when it'll be. We'll see, though. Now, the reason I'm reviewing this right now, too, is because also, I just read Werewolf of Fever Swamp. That was the last book I had to read to see the adaptation done in this book as well. And also, because we're in the middle of a Werewolf review-a-thon with Goosebumps Completionist and Monster Blood, aka my friend Austin. And I'll put both of their channel links down in the description down below. We're all going to be reviewing monster stuff revolving around werewolves on Goosebumps here soon. Of course, Completionist and I are doing it kind of every time we review something, we're posting reviews for it. Austin is either going to get caught up at some point or he's going to post a big rating video for all the books at one go, all the werewolf-themed ones. So we'll see what happens with that. Anyway, this is basically, for anybody who doesn't know, Goosebumps Graphix are typically comic book adaptations of the original novels. And usually with the other ones called Goosebumps Graphix, not Slappy's Tales of Horror, they're typically 3 different novels adapted at that time by 3 different people, and it's usually just an artist who does really good art or sometimes really bad art. We'll get into that in a moment too. And specifically what they do is they adapt the whole story and then they basically copy and paste lines from the story and dialogue and stuff into the actual panels of the book. And I love that a lot. I think that works really well. I think it fits very well for this kind of adaptation process. I really like that. Usually you have some fantastic work. The curse that has always been there is that every single time you have one of these books, again, all of them have 3 novels adapted there, so they're about 150 pages or so, 136. Each adaptation's about 40 to 50 pages apiece. And what I've seen constantly is that it seems like 2, if not the very first 2 stories in each of these books will be phenomenal. And then the third one's horrible because of the art style, but the actual storytelling is kind of faithful to what the original novel had going for it. I just read Goosebumps Graphix Volume 1 and got that out of the way. The worst one in that was Abominable Snowman of Pasadena, and it was awful looking. I mean, it was unbelievable bad. I told my wife about this, I showed it to her. Just the art style was so not fitting for that storyline of the way I saw it in my head when I was reading the original book. So some of these artists they're picking out for these books to do adaptations as art style for comic books are horrible here. They're typically bad. And this book carries on that terrible curse about, in this case, there's 4 stories adapted in here, and it carries on that case of being really, a really bad one, and we'll get there. Now, the interesting thing with this, it's actually selecting one story from each of the previous 3 volumes and putting them in here, and then adding a new one onto that, which is Not a Living Dummy. The original 3 that are picked out, I'll go ahead and look at them, are Jamie Tolagson, I think is what his name is, Tolagson. He adapted A Shocker on Shock Street, that's the first one in here. That came from Volume 2 of Goosebumps Graphix, which is phenomenal. I love Volume 2. It's probably my favorite out of all 3 of the volumes. Really love that one. Shocker on Shock Street's a phenomenal novel, and it's also a fantastic comic adaptation here. Then you have Gabriel Hernandez, one of my favorites, working on the Goosebumps Graphix stuff when he's there, doing Werewolf of Fever Swamp. I just read the original adaptation that he did of that on the Volume 1 of Goosebumps Graphix. I just reviewed that yesterday. Really well done, really enjoyed that. Then you also have Ted Naife, I think is what his name is, adapting Ghost Beach, which Ghost Beach, I love the novel so much. I think it's the best compared to the episode, and I think it's better than his adaptation, but I think the adaptation's still good to a comic book format. We'll get into some of these complaints that I have about some of these and some little critiques I have and some really good praises I have for them. But then you get to Dave Roman, who adapted Night of the Living Dummy. The original #7 classic book from the 90s series came out in 1993. You have him adapting that here, the first ever Slappy tale. And I have a lot to say about that in a lot of ways. So we'll get there in a little while. Just to give you a heads up, the first 3 stories in here, Shocker on Shock Street, Werewolf of Fever Swamp, Ghost Beach, are fantastic. In the most part, I would say they're fantastic. Night of the Living Dummy is the worst. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I'll get into that in a moment. To kind of start off, I'll show you some samples here and there of the different art styles. I really love how the art style for Shocker on Shock Street looks so much like Watchmen by Alan Moore. I really, really dig that. I love the art shading and stuff. I think it just works so well for that. Basically, a couple of kids are in an amusement park, and it's crazy and nutso, and I think this is one of the best comic adaptations we've had from anything, from the Goosebumps Graphix stuff. I think it's just phenomenal for the most part. Now, there's some things I need to talk about too. As you could tell, like I was just showing you, they're in color this time around. They have gone through, and even though they're just basically copy and pasting the 3 adaptations they've already done of Werewolf Fever Swamp, Shocker on Shock Street, and Ghost Beach, they colorized them this time around. And I will say this, I think that Shocker on Shock Street looks phenomenal. All of these look great, and possibly, I would say for the most part, better in black and white. Shocker on Shock Street, compared to the other 2, looks phenomenal with color. Again, it looks like Watchmen in a lot of ways. The way it's very sleek looking. Now, Ghost Beach and Werewolf of Fever Swamp, I still like the art coloring for this. I think those are better in black and white. But I do like the coloring, but I like them more in black and white. I wanted to make that expressly clear. It's not bad whatsoever. It's just kind of a mixed bag there. So, of course, in Werewolf of Fever Swamp, there's a lot of different shapes and styles for how they draw the characters. I know this isn't the most exciting area to pick out to show you some of the stuff, but I didn't want to really ruin anything too much. I don't really like the character designs in Werewolf of Fever Swamp. I think they kind of look a little odd, like Beavis and Butthead-like. But but overall, I really like the adaptation there. I think it really fits. It's really fun and enjoyable. There's also something else kind of interesting, too. Each of these stories, when they're introduced, when you're reading a new one, they're introduced by Slappy. And that's kind of like before Slappy World, like 10 years before Slappy World, I think, or a little bit less than that. But still, it's kind of interesting seeing that happen before Slappy World ever became a thing. So that's kind of cool. Now, looking at Ghost Beach, you have kind of more of a manga type of style. Of course, I love my comic books, and when I see something like this type of style, I think more of a manga type of style of art. And I don't mind that. I think it actually is fine for Ghost Beach. It's not my favorite, but it's just kind of fine. Some of the creepier things towards the end of the book, involving like the guy in the cave and stuff, that looks really good there. Really enjoy most of that stuff, I think. That stuff all works. I think the colorization's not as good as the black and white again, but still works. And then we get to Night of the Living Dummy, adapted by Dave Roman. And this is horrible. It's horrible. I mean horrible. So, this is your art style for Night of the Living Dummy. Now mind you, when you look at Volume 1 of these Goosebumps Graphix books, and you see something like, for example, Scarecrow Walks at Midnight is in Volume 1 of Goosebumps Graphix. And Scarecrow Walks at Midnight has some of the most beautiful art style I've ever seen in Goosebumps comics. I think it's just wonderful. I'd love to I would love to see Night of the Living Dummy adapted with that art style. I forgot who did that, but it looks wonderful. I love that so much. I raved about that art in my review I just uploaded yesterday for Volume 1 of Goosebumps Graphix. I would love to see Night of the Living Dummy have something like that, or with Mr. Hernandez here doing Werewolf of Fever Swamp. I would love to see one of those kinds of artists doing that style, because Night of the Living Dummy is a very dark book. It was the kickoff to get Slappy just popularized. People love that book. We all love the cover with Tim Jacobus, and it's a classic, man. It's one of the classics. It's kind of like the original Child's Play. Once you've seen it, or even know that there's a whole series following, it kind of ruins that first book a little bit. But for the most part, it's fantastic. It's a dark book. It's scary. There's some brutal stuff in there. And in turn, you would assume if you're going to adapt that one to a comic book format, that you'd do a dark, realistic art style for it. But no, instead we get Thundercats Roar type of art style, or She-Ra type of art style. I hate the art style for Night of the Living Dummy here. I think Dave Roman just butchered the first dummy book with this. I really think that. And I know I'm being a little hostile here, but I think Dave Roman genuinely brings disrespect to that story, the way he adapted it here. It is clearly the worst adaptation in this entire book. I will hold to that until I die. I love that original novel. I've read it more than any Goosebumps book I've ever owned. I've read it a billion times since I was a kid when I got into Goosebumps. I'm telling you, the attempt to just ruin that story here is just frustrating to me. I think that's the most insulting thing about it. I think Dave Roman might mean well in some ways. I don't think he had limits, though, to where he needed to just cut out all kinds of stuff. The dude is cutting things and paraphrasing things rather than, again, most of these adaptations, especially the first three in here, are typically word for word, panel for panel. Like, they'll adapt a scene, and then if they have to have characters talking, or if they have, like, I don't know, like a scene described a certain thought or something, they literally copy and paste it from the book, the original novel, and, like, put it into the panel so that people know, like, oh yeah, this is directly from that old source material. That's not what this is doing. This is paraphrasing all the time. Even Abominable Snowman at Pasadena in Volume 1 didn't do this. So, why did you do it, Dave Roman? Maybe they gave you a free pass to do it, but it was stupid. Who was thinking to do that? This book is about, what, a little bit closer to 170 pages or so? Yeah, about 180 pages. And the art style just bogs it down. But again, the paraphrasing is what really gets to me the most. Because, for example, I'll read this one to you. You tell me if this sounds like it came out of Not a Living Dummy, the original book. Because when I read this, I was like, I don't even need to open that book to tell that's not in there. I would be willing to bet money right now between you and I, the viewer, the viewer and the reviewer. I'd be willing to bet money that this is not in that original novel. I'm not even going to bother looking because I guarantee it's not in there. Modern comic book writers and creation people in there, they have no talent. That's why they draw like garbage, like what happened here. That's why they put politics into their work. They think so desperately that they're as intelligent as somebody like Rod Serling or anybody that's had that kind of caliber of writing credit. They think they're that type of person. Jordan Peele thinks he's that type of person. And then you read phrases like this. See, of course, Not a Living Dummy is about two twins who fight and argue all the time, and one of them happens to find in a dumpster a ventriloquist dummy named Slappy, or she names him Slappy, and she is like making money off of him by going to birthday parties and, you know, performing there, and then the other twin's jealous, and she eventually gets her own dummy called Mr. Wood. And in the midst of all of this, there's a lot of chaos around things breaking in the house. Somebody in the house is breaking things, whether it be the kids or possibly the dummies, nobody really knows. But the fact is there's a dummy there. And when the kind of not main character, there's one twin that's kind of our main character, then there's one that's not. The one that's not is talking about how she's going to make money off of performing with Slappy. And she says these words here. You mean we're going to be rich? I'm the brains, you're just the muscle? Right. Together, Slappy and I are going to make serious bank. Serious bank. In a 1993 book? I don't believe it. I don't believe that. That's not in that book. I'll put money on it that it's not in that book. So then it goes on, and by the way, in the original novel, I don't think I said this in my review, but you can't really relate to those two twins. They fight and argue so much, they both get on my nerves. I don't think I stated that in my review. It seems like I'm more brutal now about that, just because I got used to reading more Goosebumps stuff over time, and I'm not used to seeing that kind of irritation constantly for 130 pages. Anyway, so looking at the rest of this, those two kids are obnoxious. I can't stand them. But number two, the art style is obnoxious. I can't stand it, so I don't even like to look at it. At least it's in color, though, because, again, Abominable Snowman of Pasadena, it should have been in color. It looks like Bone, the comic series Bone. It's so messy and sloppy, I couldn't really process what I was looking at. But with here, at least it's in color, so I can kind of divide the colors up and the things I'm looking at, even though it's horrible. But then some other things start happening. Mr. Wood looks horrible. I'm going to do a little page surfing here, try to find Mr. Wood to show you how horrible he looks. They did not do well by Mr. Wood, dude. I'm going to be honest with you. He looks like garbage. He looks like a preppy bully in school. Look at that redheaded stepchild looking type of dude. He's awful. And one thing, too, I noticed, too, is constantly Slappy and Mr. Wood's eyes are constantly moving around and looking at each other and stuff. This looks like fan fiction in the worst possible way, like the bad kind of fan fiction. Or the fan art, you know what I mean? Like kind of the really bad fan art. It's a sad thing. It's a sad state of affairs for Not a Living Dummy. They have completely disrespected that here. Scholastic's responsible for this, and mainly Dave Roman is responsible for this, in my opinion. We have a horrible cover for this book. I love the Goosebumps Graphix covers because they look great with the 3 panels showing the different monsters, like the horror and stuff in the Volume 2 one. And then they show, like, this horrible, ugly version of Slappy here that, to me, almost looks worse than the IDW Slappy that they have for those comics. They're both terrible. I hate the swirls for the eyes. Anyway, then it just gets weirder and weirder. The dad has been completely deleted from the Not a Living Dummy story, which, mind you, he's the one who gives the other twin her dummy, Mr. Wood. He's been completely obliterated from the story. He doesn't exist. And I don't know if that's like some kind of weird SJW move or some kind of thing like that. I'm not really sure why Roman thought that was a good idea to do that. It made no sense. Now the mom is just like a stay-at-home, or not stay-at-home, she's like a single mom, which I have a single mom. I'm not trashing single moms. It's like she's a single mom, and like the dad's not in the picture. Now she gave the daughter Mr. Wood. Why did you change that? What was the point of doing that? At first I thought maybe my memory was a little messed up. But then when I got to that scene, I was like, no, the dad gave her the dummy. Why did you change that? So there's some really stupid, oddball things changed here. There's a really disrespectful art style that makes even the scarier moments, like the gross-out talent show scene, if you remember what I'm talking about, if you've read that first book, that scene should be gross. Really gross. It's not here. It's funny and goofy because of how awful it is. And don't get me started on how funny the dog scene is. If you've ever read this original book, the dog scene at the end of the book, it's brutal, it's horrific, it's kind of shocking, honestly. And in here it's hilarious because of how absolutely awful it's done in execution. If you don't believe me, and you're a collector of Goosebumps and you love comic books and stuff, pick up this book, read that Not a Living Dummy section of it, and tell me that's not one of the most funny, awful things in the dog section that I'm talking about of the story. Because it doesn't work at all. And again, that alone, that particular part of the story alone, is a great proof of how this should have had a dark, realistic type of art style to really make this feel like Not a Living Dummy. The pacing's not even there. It feels so squished together so fast. I think it's like a 30-page adaptation rather than a 40 or 50 like most of these, which just ruins it. It feels like it just flies by. It's not very well put together. Again, to have the first 3 stories in here, again, Werewolf Fever Swamp, Ghost Beach, Shocker on Shock Street, to look as good as those look, and then to go to this piece of crap that looks like the thing in the back of the comic book shop that can't sell well. To go from those to that is just unforgivable to me. I think it's just insulting. I think it insults the legacy that Stein has with something like the original Dummy book. It's unbelievable to me. That's all I can really say about it. I think it's insulting to us fans. I think that you should be mad about that because it deserves more respect. And the fact that even Stein, like himself, is saying, like, hey, this is the canonical ending to that original Dummy book, this is how those things are explained, that's stupid. I'm sorry, Stein, you're wrong. It's stupid. As a fan, I won't accept this as headcanon, I won't accept this as new canon, I won't touch this. This is a great example of people that are talentless hacks, ruining wonderful, precious properties that people love to death. IDW has proven this with their Goosebumps comics. They're terrible pretty much always. They're typically agenda-driven. I'm not so much saying this is agenda-driven, it just seems like a stupid mess. But again, I don't want to trash the whole book because the first 3 stories out of the 4 are phenomenal. They're well done, they're well executed as adaptations. Again, the first 3 graphic novels of the Goosebumps Graphix look really good. I really enjoy most of those, or at least 2 out of the 3 of the stories in each of those books. Every single one has one bad story in its adaptation process. This one happens to be Not a Living Dummy, which deserved the most respect, in my opinion. This and Haunted Mask, if you were ever going to adapt them, you should have adapted those and done it with immense respect. If you did Haunted Mask like this, the fans would never forgive you. Ever. They would never, ever forgive you for this, and they shouldn't, either. So either way, I'm just done with this. Gabriel Hernandez, Ted Naife, and Jamie Tolagson, fantastic work. Loved your work on the old Goosebumps Graphix stuff. Dave Roman, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. You should be. You should just be ashamed of yourself, period. Don't do this again. If you ever get the responsibility to adapt a Goosebumps monster to a comic book format, do not do this. You're the equivalent of when people like myself pick up, like, I don't know, the Force Awakens comic adaptation, and they've somehow squished a 2.5-hour long movie into 4 issues, which is like 20 pages apiece. Don't do that. You can't do it. Just show some respect, okay? Anyway, When it comes to Goosebumps Graphix, sort of kind of Volume 4, sort of kind of soft reboot, whatever you want to call it, Slappy's Tales of Horror, if I had to rate this terrible mess on a 5-star basis, this huge tragedy against mankind on a 5-star basis, I would rate it probably a 4 out of 5 stars, and I know that's a little high for all the ranting I've been doing for the last 20 minutes, but I will say this. Not a Living Dummy is the big thing holding this back, because the first 3 stories are looking great, they're fun, they're well executed in adaptation. Slappy was completely dishonored, in my opinion, in this book, and disrespected. I think the fans were too, and they don't even know it. Read the original book. Do not read that piece of trash adaptation of Not a Living Dummy. Just trust me on that. Anyway, what are your thoughts on this book? Put your thoughts in comments down below. I finally got this review underneath 20 minutes, or right at 20 minutes. That makes me feel good. Anyway, thank you for watching, guys. God bless you today. Have a good weekend, whatever's left of it by the time you see this video. And goodbye.